I started taking tamoxifen even though we were still waiting for these hormonal tests to be done. I wasn't very happy about taking tamoxifen because I had read some negative data on it, although hundreds and thousands of women took it and it seemed to be very safe and very successful. It was just me. And then the test came back and said that I was postmenopausal, and my oncologist said, well, I was eligible to take an anastrozole. The only problem we then had was that throughout all this time I'd been going privately, as I had corporate private medical insurance, and this drug was very expensive, so we didn't really know whether I'd get cover or not. I subsequently found out that I would have to fund it myself. So the next stage I started looking into was finding myself an NHS doctor to see if I could get this on the NHS, which I subsequently did, but this was several months down the line. So I actually took tamoxifen for about 6 months and I was absolutely fine. I had the operation in March, and at the beginning of May I started 5 weeks of daily radiotherapy, which I did not find too bad. I got a little tired. I carried on going to the gym because I found it relieved the stress. I carried on going to work. I was doing part-time work. Everybody was very understanding and very supportive and said if I needed any time off or anything, and sometimes I'd go home early and sometimes I'd go and do a light workout. One of my charity runs was coming up at that time, but as the weather wasn't very good, I decided to postpone it till after my radiotherapy had finished, because I didn't want to catch a bug or anything during that time, because what they do is if you miss a few days, they tag it on to the end. So it means the treatment goes on longer. Halfway through the treatment, my oncologist had a meeting with me because he said to me, to do with the diagnosis that I had, he wanted to actually cut off the supply of my ovaries. What he meant there was, he said that they could irradiate the ovaries, which would stop any supply of estrogen carrying on, as my tumour was estrogen receptive. It sounded quite alarming, but he assured me that it was quite a natural process. It was exactly the same thing, but instead of the radiotherapy being on my breast, it would very much be on my abdomen. There were some side effects to that. They said I would probably get quite nauseous, but it would be a few days later. At that time I decided to get some extra advice, so I contacted my gynaecologist, who said the alternative was that he would do an operation. And I said no way was I going to have another operation. So I decided to go ahead and have it done under radiotherapy. I found it a little bit strange, but I could understand why they wanted to do it. And I was a little reserved about it, but eventually I said, yes, well, we may as well do it. And they did it at the same time. And although they'd said I'd feel nauseous a few days later, I felt nauseous almost immediately. So I had 4 days of this treatment, and I got a pretty good idea what some people must feel like when they undergo chemotherapy, because I felt pretty nauseous. For me, how I got through this was I drank ginger, I put in ginger in my food, and I also drank Lucozade, and that alleviated the nauseousness and feeling sick. But by the last day I'd actually had enough, and I did tell the radiotherapy team that really and truthfully, I was so relieved that it was over and done with, because the abdomen is a pretty sensitive area of the body. I just find it had more of an effect on me, whereas on my breast, apart from feeling a little bit sore, I found it fine. The team at the Cromwell were absolutely fantastic. I had a wonderful team of radiotherapists. We all became great friends during that time, and I felt that it was very much a team effort. They had wonderful nurses in the department. There was also a skincare person that I would go and see once a week, and she would check my skin, and she would give me all sorts of gels and creams to put on if I needed to. And throughout that entire time, I never felt on my own. I don't want to say it was an enjoyable time, but it wasn't an unpleasant time. But the only time it wasn't very nice was during that ovary time, where they had to irradiate the ovaries. Otherwise, I think I was pretty fortunate. I pretty well sailed through it. And at the end of the 5 weeks, I was still taking tamoxifen and had to carry on taking tamoxifen until such time as I could go on the NHS and find a doctor who would fund an anastrozole, which I did find in the November. And I started taking an anastrozole straight away. I was very fortunate. So I was able to literally stop tamoxifen one day and start anastrozole the very next day. And we are now 5 years down the line. I'm coming up to my 5th year of having my diagnostic test. I'm having to have my mammogram in 3 weeks' time. I've been taking anastrozole daily throughout that entire period, apart from my 6 months on tamoxifen. I feel very well, I feel very healthy. I did have a few scares for the first couple of years, and I had to go back into hospital and have an operation on my other breast because they found some underlying tissue which they weren't too happy about. I was very fortunate that that operation was done under sedation, so I didn't even have a general anaesthetic. And also they found some underlying scar tissue in the breast where I'd had the tumour removed, and I had to have all sorts of subsequent mammograms done and tests done, and that happened at my first and second year, and it was very nerve-wracking, but I got through it and there were absolutely no signs of any cancer reoccurring. And the only thing I will say is that I kept up my charity runs, and 3 weeks after completing my radiotherapy, I did a 5k 3-mile charity run for Race for Life in Richmond Park, and my fitness had not dropped at all. In fact, the run went really well. So I normally do these runs in about 30 minutes, and I think I probably averaged 35, which I was very pleased about. And the following year I went off and did quite a lot of fundraising. I went to Birmingham, I went down to Portsmouth, I did several runs in London, all for the same charity, all for Cancer Research, Race for Life. And I felt very passionately about it because I felt I was really putting something back. And I also got a lot of publicity for myself. I contacted the local press and told them what I was doing for my community and what these runs were all about and why I was doing it. And in fact, Cancer Research nominated me one of their top fundraisers in West London, and came and did a small presentation, and I was adorned with pink roses and a pink t-shirt, and I got a glass of pink champagne, which was all very lovely, and this all happened about 2 or 3 years later. So a lot of good has come out of my personal experience of breast cancer, and I would say it does not have to be awful, and it does not have to be the end of the world. I found for me it was an incredible journey. It was a roller coaster, but most of the time I found that I was unbelievably supported, and I found out an awful lot, and nowadays I think if it's caught early, the chances of survival are incredibly high, and I feel very lucky.